What's going on, guys? Welcome to the first ever episode of the Fantasy Reserve. My name is Vitrano, and I am joined today by my co-host.
I'm Matt.
And what we're gonna do during this podcast is we're gonna go game by game, talk about our favorite plays of the day, talk about our favorite, starts and sits from each of the games, and see if we can help you guys win some of your fantasy championships this year. So, Matt, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Vitrano. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. We're, ready to start this. Excited that we have a podcast that we're gonna get going on, and excited to talk about some football.
Yep. We're all here for football, so let's get right into it. One of the first games coming up on Sunday is the Browns versus the Giants. So, Vitrano, what are your thoughts on that game?
So first and foremost, as far as quarterbacks are concerned, I really don't like Daniel Jones here. Daniel Jones did play very well versus Washington, but Washington has the worst defense in football by far. Um, the Browns, on the other hand, they are no slouch. They hold quarterbacks, especially limiting them in points. They were one of the lowest last year, and they've only allowed 12.3 points this year to quarterbacks. Daniel Jones hasn't exactly played great over the last 2 years. So I don't really like Daniel Jones at all, but I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. So last year in 2023, the Browns had the second best passing defense. They only allowed 3,149 yards. And this year in 2024, they're not the second best passing defense yet, but it's still early. But they still have a very solid defense. They have Miles Garrett, who's one of the, considered one of the best defensive players. So yeah, I don't think the odds of Daniel Jones performing well against a good passing defense and then Miles Garrett is that high. And then Daniel Jones doesn't have very many weapons. Malik Neighbors is looking great, but other than that, he's still a rookie and he doesn't really have any more offensive weapons besides that.
Yeah, we saw some very bright points from Wan'Dale Robinson in week one. He was targeted 12 times, surprisingly, to everybody's surprise. Um, but other than that, Devin Singletary isn't exactly somebody that you're going to put into your starting lineups a lot of the time this year. He's not going to be somebody that produces or helps Daniel Jones in any way. Um, so I don't really see the point in starting Daniel Jones this week, or for the most part, any of the Giants' offense. I think that Malik Neighbors is somebody that can definitely get it done for your team if given the opportunities, and it seems like Daniel Jones is giving them. But other than that, there aren't really many options for New York as far as this offense is concerned in fantasy. But what about the Browns?
So the Giants have a very extremely mid-tier pass defense last year, and they're kind of hovering at the same place this year. So their pass defense isn't the best, or it's not the worst, but Deshaun Watson isn't really performing up to par of what you want out of a QB. Amari Cooper is a wide receiver one on that team, and Amari Cooper is pretty good, but he's only gotten like 4 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. So I have him in one of my lineups, and I'm gonna start him just because he's a wide receiver one, and there's nobody better. But I wouldn't really expect too much. He could get an appropriate amount of points and everything, just because he's the wide receiver one against a very mid-tier pass defense. But we can't really trust Deshaun Watson. So if you have a better person than Amari Cooper to start this week, I'd probably lean towards that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and bring up a stat as well here, Matt. Deshaun Watson this year has the same amount of passing touchdowns as he does lawsuits through through the first two games. He's averaging a 1-to-1 ratio on lawsuits from Houston that he is passing touchdowns. He's also not very productive so far. Number 24 in passing yards. He's not even in the top half. His efficiency is horrible. He's ranked 30th in yards per attempt with 4.5. 25th in fantasy points per dropback, 0.32. He's just not really getting it done. And it seems like when things like this do happen, and he does end up getting these lawsuits and everything, it kind of affects his mental ability. I actually think that there's a good chance that this makes him play worse. So Deshaun Watson definitely not startable. Amari Cooper is still getting a lot of targets though, and with David Njoku, I don't see that dropping at all. Um, but definitely not a Deshaun Watson person over here. I'm gonna be quite honest with you if you couldn't tell.
Yeah, that's a good idea about Njoku being out and getting a lot of targets. Still, just Watson's not very reliable. Um, let's see. So the Giants have one of the worst rushing defenses. They had one of the worst last year, and they have one of the worst this year. And personally, I like Jerome Ford. I think he's pretty solid. So if you have Jerome Ford in your repertoire, I think Jerome Ford would be a good start this week. Vitrano.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree, but there are some concerns there for me for Jerome Ford. Primarily being last week, for some reason, Jerome Ford had some very big runs. He only got what 9 carries, 7 carries, for 63 yards. He was killing it on the ground, but the Browns really wanted to get Deontay Foreman in there and get him some reps. And I feel like that was at the cost of Jerome Ford's fantasy production. Um, I played him myself, and it was pretty disappointing because he'd never got any more carries, and he was killing it on the ground, and Deontay Foreman wasn't. So that's a concern for me, but I don't think that it should be too much of a big deal. I think that Foreman probably has they probably see what they're gonna get out of him. Uh, so I expect that not to happen to Ford again.
Yeah, so to sum it up, I think Amari Cooper is a decent start if you don't have anybody better, and I think Jerome Ford is also a decent start if you don't have anybody better or you need a flex option. So let's go to the next game. That'll be the Saints and the Eagles. Vetrano, what are your thoughts on that?
I was very critical of Derek Carr the first 2 weeks. I definitely had him as a sit, but after seeing how much the offense has changed, with the Saints getting their new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak over from the 49ers, who helped the 49ers create that great you know offense that they had last year. The Saints are looking to be that good the same way. So I'm gonna start Derek Carr for sure. And Kamara, I'm practically starting. I mean, you're starting pretty much the entire Saints offense minus the tight ends. But I do have some concerns regarding Rashid Shaheed versus Chris Olave. What do you
Yeah,
think, Matt?
so I'm gonna agree. So last year the Eagles' passing defense was pretty bottom tier. Their secondary is bottom tier. Derek Carr has been playing really good the first 2 weeks, and I don't really see that slowing down against a bottom tier secondary. Uh, yeah, for Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So from what I've seen, Shaheed is kind of stepping up to the plate with Derek Carr. They're connecting the past 2 weeks, and then he's also fulfilling that role of like a deep passing threat. He did that last season. He's doing it this season as well. And yeah, I don't know what it is about Olave. He gets, he's good and he'll get the ball sometimes, but he just doesn't get it as much as you think from a wide receiver one. So he's really kind of disappointing in just like fantasy production for a wide receiver one. So yeah, I do have some concerns about him too. He's kind of unpredictable on like where he'll go with points and if he'll get the ball as much as we think.
Yeah, I agree. The main, stat I actually saw this morning, I believe it was ESPN or NFL, they posted some stats about the guys who are making the most separation on their routes, and Chris Olave was, I believe he was number one. He's creating tons of separation on the routes that he's running. He's just not really getting targeted. 8 total targets over, the last 2 games, so averaging just about uh, four a game. Whereas Rashid Shaheed is he has 9. So he's averaging more targets, and he has more receptions, and again has more touchdowns. Um, Along with that, Chris Olave is going up against the Eagles' best corner, who limited Drake London last week pretty effectively up until that touchdown during the last drive. I see this being a similar result. I think Rashid Shaheed should feast. I would hope that Chris Olave would do the same. But judging by how the game's gone the last 2 weeks, I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
Yeah, and to just kind of transition over to like the ground game, last year the Eagles had the 10th best defense against running backs, but this year they're not doing super great against running backs. They're kind of like towards the bottom tier. And then we saw Kamara last week drop like 42 points or more or less depending on your settings, but he dropped about 40 points last week. So Kamara playing great. He's not really seems like he'll ever slow down. You know, every year people think he's going to do a little bit worse, but he just keeps popping off. So it seems like the Eagles are going to be pretty vulnerable to him as well. And then yeah, so I think Kamara has a really good start against the Eagles as well.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think, again, everybody outside of the tight ends, like I was very much looking forward to seeing if Juwan Johnson could be good this year, but it doesn't seem like any of the tight ends are worth value. But every person on the Saints offense looks like they could be in prime position to, score you some points this week. As
Yeah,
for the Eagles, you know, I'm gonna be honest. I have some concerns for Jalen Hurts.
yeah. Just to say quickly for the while we talk about the running backs, the Saints last year were kind of towards the bottom tier, like mid to bottom tier for running back defenses, but this year they're actually ranked second right now in terms of rush yards allowed. But Saquon is Saquon, so if you have Saquon, you're starting him no matter what. He can overcome like any amount of like obstacles probably. So yeah, you start Saquon no matter what. But yeah, I have to agree with Jalen Hurts. I think Hurts is great for fantasy points because of the tush push. Like he'll always get you those points, but I feel like his passing has been a little bit ineffective recently. So I'm not really too in on him as a passer. Plus AJ Brown is out. So if you have Jalen Hurts, you're still going to start him himself. But for his wide receivers, I'm not super excited about the wide receivers this week. Vitrano.
Yeah, so, Jalen Hurts, he hasn't been the most effective passer so far this year. It's been, it's been kind of bad for the Eagles. I know that he's been scoring a lot of points, but New Orleans has been limiting the quarterback quite efficiently. They have 4 interceptions to 1 touchdown allowed. They've also allowed 1 rushing touchdown, which is a concern for Jalen Hurts. But overall, they have been very good against the quarterback. I think their defense is only starting to get a little more confidence. I do think that Jalen Hurts is always a must start because of his rushing upside, but there are some concerns there as far as his ability to score points. He's also without AJ Brown, which means that Lattimore should be on Devontae Smith, and that could possibly limit the Eagles' offense as well. Along with that, you know, the Saints aren't any slouches on defense versus the running back. They've allowed the second least amount of points to running backs so far this year with just a little over 11 and have only allowed a total of 100 rushing yards. I think that, this is going to be a very tough matchup for the Saints, but on paper, it looks very much in their favor so far this year. And, the Eagles' offense doesn't look like they're in prime position to win you your league this week.
Yeah, I have to agree. So to sum it up, you're still going to start your studs. You're going to start Saquon. You're going to start Hurts. Kamara is obviously a good start, and then Rashid Shaheed might be the sleeper of the week, and Derek Carr might be the sleeper of the week for those 2 games that you should consider starting. So next game up is Vikings versus Texans. Bertrand, what are your thoughts on that game?
I think to everybody's surprise, Sam Darnold has played very well this year, uh, compared to what everybody thought he was going to do, and that includes a very good game against the defending Super Bowl champion, or sorry, not Super Bowl champion, NFC champion 49ers. You know, he's holding his own, and against Houston, they have not been, really good against quarterbacks this year. Caleb Williams even had his moments, not to say that he played all that great, but I do think that Sam Darnold currently has better weapons and is set up to possibly be a sleeper start this year for pretty much every week. So I'm kind of leaning toward the Sam Darnold start. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, so the Texans and the Vikings last year, um they were both kind of bottom tier passing defenses. And this week, Jordan Addison is out. Justin Jefferson is confirmed healthy. So Justin Jefferson is going to absolutely feast against a lower tier passing defense. The Texans right now, they are a little bit higher on the passing defense, but they have been playing like people like the Bears to kind of inflate their stats a bit. So let's just consider them like a middle to bottom tier still. And then, yeah, Justin Jefferson, who just gets it done no matter what. We saw him last week, and then with Sam Darnold, and he got the ball like across pretty much the whole field, which was pretty insane. So I have to agree. The Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson start, like those could be very Justin Jefferson, of course, always, but Sam Darnold might be a sleeper pick. I have to agree. And then in terms of the Texans, CJ Stroud is obviously a must start because CJ Stroud just looks incredible. And he has three weapons. He has Diggs, he has Nico Collins, and he has Tank Dell. He has three very good options. They're all like very high wide receiver one worthy. Maybe Tank Dell's still working his way up to wide receiver one, but he seems like he's shown us a lot to get to that caliber. So he has three weapons, of course, that of course he can get you those fantasy points. So I think both quarterbacks would be a good start.
Yeah, you know what? I'm actually glad you brought up the CJ Stroud is a must start because I do agree. However, I'm benching him this week. I am playing Brock Purdy and Derek Carr in favor of CJ Stroud, and the main reason is the Vikings have kind of showed out this year on defense. They're allowing the fourth least, points per game to the quarterback position. They forced three interceptions compared to allowing one total touchdown. I do think that Nico Collins, Diggs, those guys will get it done for the Texans as far as like your fantasy teams are concerned. But uh, me having two other options at quarterback, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna sit CJ Stroud because I feel that this Vikings defense might be a little scary for uh, for CJ Stroud. I want to see how the protection holds up for him.
Yeah, I still think CJ Stroud's a good start just because he's shown us that he's calm and collected and he plays amazingly. But I'd have to agree. I think starting Purdy over Stroud is probably the play, especially since we saw the Rams last week play the Cardinals, and then we saw Kyler Murray throw two touchdowns in like 10 minutes across the field to Marvin Harrison Jr. I think Purdy's a pretty good start against what we saw yesterday or last week.
Yeah, but you're definitely going to go ahead and start Nico Collins. I probably would start Diggs as well, another one of those players that you want to start. As far as everybody else on that offense is concerned, I'm pretty sure Joe Mixon is hurt nowadays, and I don't think there's a very high chance of him playing. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave it at that. The tight end definitely not. If you have CJ Stroud, if he's your best choice, obviously play him. If you have a better quarterback option, I would go ahead and sit him this week. I think that this might be a very scary Vikings defense.
Yeah, I have to agree. So the Vikings' rushing defense this year seems pretty top tier. Actually, the Texans have allowed 175 rush yards, and the Vikings have allowed 176 rush yards. So it seems like both defenses this year are coming out pretty strong in the ground game. So Mixon is out. Cam Akers seems to be next in line to take up the role. So I wouldn't really recommend starting him against a good defense.
What are you
And
talking
then
about? Cam Akers is going for 200 yards, four touchdowns, and he might get your girl's phone number at the end.
yeah, he very might. But
The, it,
Vitrano, Vitrano, who's the Vikings running back again?
Aaron Jones, a very slept on running back. There's so much
Aaron
hate for
Jones.
Aaron Jones, and I don't get it. He has been a top quality running back for years, and he's still scored what? Let me look right here, and I can tell you, I have Aaron Jones on quite a number of my teams. He scored 9 points last week against a very, albeit tough, San Francisco rush defense. Most of those points were off of catches, but he did go for 19 against the Giants. I imagine at worst, he's probably going to get a lot of targets, which will lead to, a lot of points in PPR. I don't see this being an issue for him.
So I'm not an Aaron Jones believer myself. I had him last year in my league, and he performed very poorly for me. I remember his first game back after injury. I saw him get tackled by a defensive player, and it literally looked like he cartwheeled down the field. After that, I was like, I'll never pick him again. But this year, I got him because he fell to me at a good ADP. And Aaron Jones can get it done, but I'm not a huge believer. I'm starting him just because he is RB1 and he's was my second RB that I drafted after Saquon. But I'm not a huge believer in him. But if you don't have anybody better, he's the one to play since he's a RB1, and he's not bad, but there could be better options for sure.
There definitely could be some better options. He is, he had his moment week one. We kind of saw what his floor looks like week two. But I think that his floor is still solid enough to warrant a start.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. So his floor is good. All right. So let's get on to the Buccaneers and the Broncos game. I'll start off by saying the Buccaneers have been looking amazing. Baker's playing out of his mind. I think Baker was definitely a very slept on QB. He had his moments last year where he looked great. And this year he's kind of come out strong, kind of showing what we saw last year consistently. And Godwin, Vitrano will talk about it, but he loves to talk about how Godwin got moved to the slot, which is kind of his area. And like Vitrano, he predicted that God would have a good year, and now he's not the number one wide receiver right now. He's gotten 20 points in PPR, over 20 points in PPR both these weeks. I think the Buccaneers are about to just feast on the Broncos.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and agree. Baker is absolutely cooking. You know, it's kind of ironic that his name is Baker, the way that he's been, really scoring these fantasy points all over the field. But the Buccaneers are you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna start everybody. There is some concern Rashad White might be out, but that's only for people who own Rashad White. As far as Mike Evans is concerned, he's a 1,000 yard guy every single year. There's no concern there. And like you said, I reported earlier in the offseason that Godwin was moving back to the slot. When Godwin was in the slot, he was the number one receiver at that position, and it wasn't even close. He had the most targets with the most catches and the most yards by far comparatively. It's kind of like his bread and butter, and they took him away from that. That's kind of why he struggled a little bit last year to produce points. But putting him back in that position, it's looked very good. He's that fantasy guy that we always knew that he was. He's just a producer of points, and he's going to feast on a Broncos defense that is pretty horrible, to be honest.
Yeah, so I saw a Reddit post, Petrano, about how I think it was one of the cornerbacks on the Broncos. He would rather just foul you than let you get anything on him. Do you know anything about that?
No, actually, I don't. I know that Patrick Surtain is the best corner, or if not, if he isn't one of the top three corners, he is the best corner in all of football. I do imagine he will be on Mike Evans for pretty much the entire time. Um, so there is some concern there for Mike Evans, but I have not heard anything about a corner from Denver you know, being more than willing to just conduct personal fouls or pass interferences or anything like that, rather than allowing you to stat pad.
Yeah, it might have been that corner actually that the post was about, but either way, you're gonna start Baker, you're gonna start Mike Evans, you're gonna start Godwin, even if there is a corner a little more willing to have a foul than let somebody catch the ball. He can only be on one person at a time. Mike Evans and Godwin are both gonna eat no matter what. In terms of the Broncos, let's see, Bo Nix. He's been looking all right. Sutton's a really good receiver. I like Sutton a lot. He had really good plays last year with Russell Wilson, but this year he hasn't been able to get anything going. So I would sit Cortland Sutton if you have the opportunity. I have him in like a few leagues. I'm gonna sit him because he just hasn't shown us anything to make me believe he's gonna get me those points next Sunday.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that I don't want any part of this Denver offense. I did believe at the start of the year that Bo Nix potentially could be that guy that brings Denver back to a little bit of relevance. He did look really, really good in the preseason, but he hasn't shown that at all this year. Last week, Dulcich, his tight end, was targeted the most compared to anybody else in this offense. Uh, and he only managed 3 of 8 catches for 16 yards. In comparison, Cortland Sutton is supposed to be their number one receiver. He was only targeted 4 times and got 1 catch. Both Josh Reynolds and Lil Jordan Humphrey had more targets and more receptions for more yards. And even Marvin Mims had the same amount of receptions as Cortland Sutton. This is just not an offense that's kind of working very well together. It seems like they're pretty young. They still have a lot of things that they need to figure out before they're successful. That being said, the the Buccaneers defense has not been great versus quarterbacks this year. They've allowed quite a number of points, and they're pretty average as far as allowing points to wide receivers. So they don't have a lot of, a great defense. They also allow the third most points to running backs. It's just for me, it's a matter of I don't want any part of the uh Broncos offense at all. They're just not very good, and it's more of a safe pick to sit them than start them in any way.
Yeah, I gotta agree. Plus, I don't even know who the Broncos running backs are. Like, I don't even think we need to find out or mention it. So basically, the Buccaneers, all your starts are going to be great, and then the Broncos, you don't really want to start anybody if you have the opportunity not to. So the next game we'll talk about is the Titans versus the Packers. So I think Will Levis, he's been looking all right. He doesn't do anything special for me to think, wow, he's really stepped into the role or anything. Calvin Ridley's kind of been going off a little bit. I think Calvin Ridley is pretty decent. And in terms of the Packers, actually, Vitrano, do you know Jordan Love's coming back this week? I saw he's a little bit more healthy.
I don't believe he's going to be coming back this week. I know that they didn't put him on IR. Honestly, I think that they probably should have. It did not look like a great knee injury, and it seems like they did not. It seems like they should have sat him for quite a while and just let him recoup. He's currently actually listed as questionable. I would be very shocked if he would be cleared in order to play. I don't think he's going to be. So that would put Malik Willis at quarterback. And I'm going to be honest, no, they're not going to let Malik Willis throw the ball. That's just the honest truth. I imagine this is probably going to be a very positive game behind Josh Jacobs, but not a very positive game from anybody else on this Green Bay offense.
You know what? I have to agree actually because last week Josh Jacobs, in my opinion, he's like a steady little steamboat. Like he's not the fastest, but he'll get the ball down the field slow and steady somehow. So I think I have to agree. They will give it to Josh Jacobs. They'll probably give him a bunch of carries. He might go for 100 yards again. If Jordan Love does play, I think Jordan Love is an easy start. I think Jaden Reed's an easy start, and I think if you have Dobbs and you don't have anybody else, he's a good start as well. But yeah, if Jordan Love doesn't play, I would try to avoid starting those wide receivers if you can. But Josh Jacobs is definitely a must start just in terms of volume. He's going to get a lot of volume.
I mean, to put it back into perspective, last week Josh Jacobs played only on 67% of snaps. He only played for about 2/3 of the time, and in those 67% of snaps, he got 32 carries for 151 rushing yards. 32 carries in one game for any player is absolutely insane. That's an insane number. You don't see that many times before or anymore. Maybe like 20 carries between 15 and 20, but 32 is absurd. And that just shows that they don't really want to see Malik Willis doing too much. They want to see this offense run through Josh Jacobs in their run game and see what happens.
Yep, have to agree. Like I said, he's a little steamboat. He'll take the hits and he'll get it down the field somehow. What are your thoughts on the Packers passing defense, Vitrano?
I don't think they're particularly amazing. I do think that they've had their moments. Absolutely. They have forced a total of 5 turnovers over the first 2 weeks. Um, and they really limited Anthony Richardson last week. I think that Will Levis will probably be limited all the same. I'm never starting Levis in anything. He has the only thing he's done so far this season is made 2 very meme worthy passing attempts, and that's about it. He's thrown the ball a couple times to like Calvin Ridley, but honestly, this offense is thriving more so through Tony Pollard. Surprisingly, somebody that everybody thought was going to be the 1B in their rushing offense, he's kind of taken everything into his own hands, and he's been very, very effective with what he's done, getting at least 16 attempts in both games so far, and he's averaged 4 catches over the last 2 games. So he's getting all the points kind of for this offense. He's going to be somebody that I'm definitely starting. But as far as their pass defense, Will Levis is not gonna. He's gonna struggle. I imagine he's gonna struggle just as he has week 1 and just as he did in week 2.
Yeah, I have to agree. Watching Will Levis last year, he seemed like he's always kind of struggling. All right, let's go to our next
That
game.
type's not struggling though. What?
Let's go to our let's go to our next game. That'll be the Colts and the Bears. Vitrano, how about your initial thoughts?
The Bears have a very sneaky defense. I think that there's a good chance that they limit Anthony Richardson just like the Packers did last week. They are only averaging 10 points allowed to quarterbacks through the first 2 weeks this year, which is kind of shocking, especially because their offense is horrible. Um, but I do think that they can limit the Colts in some fashion. I'm gonna be honest. I don't really know where their receivers kind of lie anymore. Seeing Alec Pierce be the number 1 receiver instead of Michael Pittman's kind of a shock to me. So I don't really want any part of this wide receiver group. I think that they're going to be limited pretty hard. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think Anthony Richardson's like the most proven passer yet. Pittman's supposed to be the wide receiver one. He's done really nothing so far. So yeah, I don't really want. You're gonna start Richardson for sure because he's a good rusher and he can get those rushing touchdowns. But yeah, if you have Pittman, like I have Pittman and I don't want to start him, but I think I have to because I know their options. But if you have somebody besides Pittman, I'd probably go with that because I don't think Pittman has really done anything, and we have no reason to believe he's going to do anything this week either.
Yeah, as far as Jonathan Taylor though, I think that this could be a game where Jonathan Taylor actually does, really well. The Bears have the most, sorry, tied for the third most targets to running backs, and they are fourth in receptions to running backs. So people are, getting the ball off versus them to their running backs. I think Jonathan Taylor's set up to have a very good day if all else fails for this offense.
Yep, I have to agree. Vitrano, is DeAndre Swift the Bears running back one?
He is the Bears running back 1, if you can even call him that. Um, nothing against DeAndre Swift, but this offense isn't doing anything. They have been quite bad this year. And their 1 win in week 1 was purely off of defensive touchdowns, punt returns. It doesn't leave a lot to be desired, it leaves a lot to be desired from this Chicago offense. DeAndre Swift, I don't see really doing anything. The Colts did allow 150 yards to Josh Jacobs last week, but DeAndre Swift isn't Josh Jacobs, and this offensive line is not the same as Green Bay has.
Yeah, I bring him up because I'm looking at the rushing yards allowed this year, and the Colts are the very bottom. They allowed the most at 474. But they did play the Texans week one where Mixon popped off, and then they played the Packers last week where Josh Jacobs popped off. So I feel like these yards are a bit inflated, and I have to agree. I don't think DeAndre Swift's going to do anything special. And to be honest, I don't really want any part of the Browns' offense
Yeah, I'm
or the
the
Bears. I'm sorry.
DeAndre Swift is not he's not Josh Jacobs, and he's certainly not Joe Mixon. So they have allowed 350 yards. That is the most by far uh, in the NFL. But DeAndre Swift behind this Bears O line that is giving Caleb Williams almost no time to do anything. You know what? I'm not gonna say that DeAndre Swift is gonna have a bad game because I honestly do believe that there are a lot of people out there that think he's gonna do really great. I just don't agree. I think that this entire Bears team needs to figure out what's going on. I just heard that Keenan Allen is even out, and Odunze's dad is on Twitter posting about him being like wide open and Caleb Williams completely missing him. It's it's quite a sight to see. Along with that, DJ Moore is visibly frustrated because Caleb Williams keeps missing him on open balls too. Uh, so they're in shambles, to be quite honest with you. There's not a lot going on in this Bears offense to be excited about anymore.
Man, you gotta love when people start posting on Twitter and it's the player's dad posting on Twitter. All the rookies' dads seem very involved this year. You got Odunze's dad posting on Twitter. You got Marvin Harrison Jr.'s dad and his lawsuit against him. It's pretty funny. All right, let's go to the Steelers versus the Chargers. So let me get your thoughts on that, Vitrano.
So, first off, Justin Herbert has, I believe he's going to play, but he did get hurt last week, and he hasn't exactly been great so far. But that's not because of his lack of being great. That's more so what the Chargers have tried to do with Harbaugh coming in as the new head coach. They love to run the ball. It hasn't, allowed for Herbert to showcase his arm talent, so he's not throwing the ball very much, and he's not going for many yards. Um, so for that, I'm definitely going to lean sitting Justin Herbert versus the Steelers. I saw what they did to Kirk Cousins. I saw what they did to Bo Nix. I'm not gonna want to start him knowing that he's probably going to get to Justin Herbert in some aspect, and they're probably going to, uh, you know, just come after him. He's blitz him, especially with that bad ankle.
Yeah, so let me just say I got to see the Steelers week one in Atlanta in person, and I have to agree. I don't want any part of the Chargers offense this week. Herbert, he doesn't really have any like super great wide receivers right now, and then what they did to the Falcons week one is they knew that Kirk Cousins couldn't really throw the ball well, so all they did was stack the running game, and then they extremely limited Bijan. So they're going to do the same thing to the Chargers. They know Herbert can't really throw anybody like reliably and very well, so they're going to just stop the running game. J.K. Dobbins is not going to go anywhere. And then what the Steelers are going to do is they just play that nice gritty football where they don't let you get down the field. When they go on their offense, they just go slow and steady, and then they kick field goals, and they're going to win somehow. So yeah, I don't really want any part of the Chargers offense against them. And in terms of the Steelers offense, uh, so I think Justin Fields is still starting. He's not really a super great passer, but I think Pickens has extreme talent. And he didn't really get much done last week, but I think Pickens is still a very good start. Or maybe not a good start this week, but I'm a fan of Pickens. I think Pickens is extremely talented. What are your thoughts, Petrona?
I'm gonna go ahead and say that I think that Pickens is the only startable player in this entire game. Um, Justin Fields has had some decent games. He went last week for 11. He went the week before for 11. They have won the game, and he has had some rushing upside, but this offense still isn't clicking. Uh, they had a bunch of big plays called back, including a multiple to George Pickens because of offensive holding. Uh, so it the offense just has a lot that they need to figure out, and I don't think that the Steelers are entirely confident in Justin Fields. I really don't, because it doesn't seem like they're opening up the playbook for him. They're trying to make it very simple. They're trying to dink and dunk and just keep it very limited for him. He threw for 117 yards last week on 13 completions. Thankfully, it was against Denver because Denver is horrible, but he's not going to be a guy that's going to score you 20 points. They're not going to overcomplicate it and make him do anything like he had to do in Chicago. So with that, along the Chargers over the first 2 weeks have also allowed the least amount of points to quarterbacks, and the Steelers are number two. So very limited on the quarterback aspect. Uh, I just don't like anybody else in this game. The Chargers have a very solid rush defense as well, just like the Steelers do. So I'm gonna leave it at George Pickens is probably the best option. Maybe Fryermuth, and just keep it at that. I think that this game is gonna be a crapshoot, to be honest.
Yeah, and one more thing before we move on, TJ Watt is kind of an insane defensive player. Like he's gonna get to Herbert at some point or some way or another. So again, like Herbert's not gonna be able to get the ball out before Watt gets to him. So
And
yeah, I
you
just
know
don't
what?
want any for it.
There is something. Joe Alt, actually, their new offensive tackle that they just drafted. I've seen some stats that have said that Joe Alt has been like the best tackle in football so far this year. He hasn't allowed a sack, he doesn't allow pressures. It's going to be interesting to see if TJ Watt matches up against him, just how successful TJ Watt's going to be, or just how successful Joe Alt is going to be. I think that that's going to be a very good matchup, but that doesn't exactly lead to fantasy producing.
Yeah, no, that will be fun to watch. And I don't know much about the right tackle, but if I had to bet money, I think Watt's gonna get there somehow. But let's go on to the next game. We're doing the Seahawks versus the Dolphins. Vitrano, let's get your thoughts first on that.
All right. So, as far as the Dolphins are concerned, I really hate the position that they're in. Tua is not playing this game. Obviously, they're gonna ride with Skylar Thompson, who is he's a third string quarterback. He is on the second string, but I think he's a third string quarterback. I don't see him having a ton of success this week versus Seattle. I think that there's a lot of people that think that the switch to Skylar Thompson is going to benefit Jalen Waddle more so than Tyreek Hill. Um, but I think that the only winner in this offense at the current moment is probably Devon Achane. Uh, he's the only person that's steadily involved. I think that with the new quarterback, the passing game is going to be very limited. Tyreek Hill might not be a starter anymore. He might not be worth being a starter anymore after a couple weeks of this. We might see some 5 point games. We might see some 6 point games. Not because he's a bad player, but because he has a quarterback that maybe just can't get him the ball. That's a concern for me. But I know A Chain is going to be very good in this offense. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I have to agree. We don't really know how Tyreek Hill is going to fare with like a lesser tier quarterback. This week you'll have to just consider it. There's still that saying, "Start your studs." So you're probably going to start Tyreek Hill because you probably drafted him very high. Um, yeah, the A Chain, like you're starting him no matter what. Like we saw last week, they gave a chain the ball like so many times. They even give it to him in garbage time for no reason. Like I don't know why they're risking his health in garbage time, but they've shown they're gonna get him the ball no matter what, and he's gonna get you those fantasy points in garbage time too. So you're starting a chain for like 1,000,000% if you have him. And then the Seahawks. I'm not a huge Geno fan, but he does all right. And Metcalf, I'm not a huge Metcalf fan, but he does all right too. I think you're starting Metcalf for sure this week. Gino, if you have nobody better. And I don't know if Kenneth Walker's playing this week. Do you know?
I've seen that he has returned to practice, but he is listed as doubtful with an oblique injury, which puts Zach Charbonnet in prime position to take over, and he's going to carry this backfield. The Dolphins have been really, really bad versus backfields this year. We saw what he did last week against, or what they did last week against James Cook. They allow the sixth most points per game currently to the running back position. And another stat to throw out there is Charbonnet played last week in 96% of snaps. He was off the field, I believe I read, for a total of 4 snaps, which means that they do believe in him. Even if he's not getting the ball in some aspect, he's going to have a healthy enough workload to be fantasy relevant. He caught 5 passes last week. He had 38 yards rushing and a touchdown to score 18 points. I see a very similar stat line. Even if he doesn't get a touchdown, I imagine his rushing yards are going to be a lot higher. I think that the Dolphins' defense is going to struggle against Seattle this week in all aspects. I think that most players are a start for the Seattle offense. However, there are some concerns for me. I don't know what's going on between uh, Jackson Smith and Jigba and Tyler Lockett, Matt. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know either. I think Jackson Smith, he's doing some good stuff in that offense. It seems like he's kind of taking over. I start him over Tyler Lockett, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very difficult to see when your old reliable wide receivers, Tyler Lockett for so many years was a, top 16 guy, and now he looks to be on the outskirts because he's 31, he's getting older, and Jackson Smith and Jigba looks to take over that spot that everybody thought he was going to last year and produce. He even had 16 targets last week. That's a lot of targets from a quarterback in any week, let alone being supposedly the wide receiver 2, maybe 3 on your own offense.
Yep, agreed. All right, let's get on to the Raiders versus the Panthers. I'm just going to sum it up that, the Panthers are switching QBs. I don't think we want to start anybody on the Panthers right now because we don't know how the QB is going to look, like with Adam Thielen or anything like that. You could start Chuba Hubbard, maybe, if you have no other options. Like, he's the RB1. He'll get a little bit of volume, but even just the RB1 volume argument, he hasn't really shown these past 2 weeks. So I don't really want to start anybody on the Panthers. For the Raiders, though, I think the sleeper of the week might be Zamir White because the Panthers are really doing not great against the running back game. So I'm going to start Zamir White personally against the Panthers.
Yeah, I think that the Panthers are dog water. I'm going to be honest. They might be the absolute worst team in football, and there are some analysts out there that think that they might lose to a Division two college at the current moment. I don't think it's that bad, but I do think it's bad enough to where if you're having your starting quarterback who's only in his second year, has only played for what, 16, 17, 18 games total, and you're already willing to bench him. I think that says enough about your organization uh, that you don't really know what you're doing. Granted, I don't really know if it's Carolina's fault or Bryce Young's fault altogether, but it's like you said, everybody in this offense for Carolina is just not worth starting. You don't know what's going to happen. This offense looks just bad. They've given up so many points over the last 2 weeks. They're kind of in prime position to be the second 0 and 17, 0 and 16 team in NFL history. And if you told me that, I'd probably believe you. But
Yeah,
what about the Raiders overall, Matt? Do you like everybody on this offense, or do you just like Zamir White?
I think Samir White's in a really good matchup this week. I think Gardner Minshew, I think he's a pretty decent quarterback. I think against so the Panthers had one of the best or they had the best passing defense last year. Right now,
let's see. They're still an upper tier passing defense. They're one, two, three, four, five. They're the sixth best right now. They've only allowed 330 yards. But the morale's down on that team. The organization's a little bit in shambles about how they want to progress the team. So I think Devonte Adams, he's still the wide receiver one, so you want to start Devonte Adams for sure. I think Gardner Minshew is a decent start, and then I'm not really sure after Devonte Adams. I think Jacoby Myers. I'm not really sure about him either. What do you think, Vitrano?
I'm gonna say no on Jacoby Myers. Not because of anything in particular. I think that he is and could be a very solid fantasy wide receiver too. But that doesn't really look like where the Raiders are going right now. This isn't the same team last year who uh, like threw him the ball between 6 and 10 times a game. This looks like a completely different team under a completely different head coach with a different mindset. Devonte Adams is Devonte Adams. He's going to demand the ball. He's going to be a monster regardless. Zamir White has been very disappointing, but he looks in prime position to bounce back against a very bad team. And Gardner Minshew, I'm gonna say depends on what your I'm gonna say it depends on what your league stats are. Matt, we play in a league where you lose 1 point for every sack, and I know a lot of people are gonna say that sounds horrible, but he's gotten 7 and 8 points the last 2 weeks. Um, so for like in our league, I'm definitely not going anywhere near Gardner Minshew. But if he's a quarterback two option in a super flex league, I might consider it because the Panthers are just that bad.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's go to the Rams versus the 49ers. So the Rams, I don't really want any part of their offense this week. Cooper Kupp is out. Puka's out. Who's left at that point? Like, I don't know. And then Kyron Williams, he's a good running back, but the 49ers are going to just, stop that. They have a really good defense. So I don't really want any part of the Rams this week. But in terms of the 49ers, Jordan Mason he's been showing up. So I think Jordan Mason is a must start. I think Ayuk's a must start. Kittle, he's trending to be out. It's a high likelihood Kittle's out. So Ayuk and Debo's out. So Ayuk's going to get all the targets. So Purdy, Ayuk, and Jordan Mason are must starts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that those are the big three in the 49ers offense. Ayuk hasn't had a great season so far this year, especially after we paid him so much money and he was complaining about it. But, he's a great player. He is one of the best route runners in the entire league. And I don't see the Rams defense being that much of a struggle. On top of that, I think Purdy is going to have a very successful game after having a mediocre game last week, and so is Jordan Mason. They're going to have this is the 49ers comeback. This was their reality call last week when they lost to the Vikings, which were an inferior team as much as people don't want to say it. They were an inferior team. They still produced more and took I think they kind of took the wind out of the sails of the 49ers, but now it's time for a comeback versus an injured Rams team. I imagine that the 49ers are going to put some points up on the Rams very easily, and they're going to get after a very hurt offensive line in the Rams and go after Matthew Stafford. I think that the Niners probably have like 10 to 12 drives this game and limit the Rams.
Yeah, I think they're going to blow the Rams out. So next game up is the Cardinals versus the Lions. So we saw Kyler Murray last week. There were two touchdowns in the first 10 minutes, and they're to Marvin Harrison Jr. We saw a really pretty interesting play. There was a fumble, and then McBride, he picked up the football and he got a touchdown. That was pretty interesting. The Cardinals, they're looking pretty good. The first week they were shaky. Like, I don't know where Kyler Murray was looking the first week. Marvin Harrison Jr. was open a couple times, at least once, and then he didn't throw it to him. But last week they looked amazing. So this week I'm going to say start Kyler Murray. I'm going to say start Marvin Harrison Jr. and start Trey McBride. Honestly, I'm not a huge James Conner fan, but he's looking great this season. I'm going to say start him. So I really like the Cardinals offense right now. The Lions, Jared Goff's been letting me down. He got 8 points last week. Amon-Ra was my top pick this year for wide receivers, and Amon-Ra's not looking great right now. So I'm still starting him on Raw for sure, but I'm not starting Jared Goff. I'm going to start Kyler Murray over him. And then I have David Montgomery, who I really like. I think he's a very good goal line back. I'm going to start David Montgomery for sure. But Gibbs isn't really producing right now. I think Gibbs is very fast and he's a very good running back and he can get you down the field with plenty of yards, but he's not really doing that yet. So I'm a little iffy on Gibbs this week.
Yeah, and you know what? I can understand what you're getting at there. As far as the Cardinals are concerned, Kyler Murray obviously a must start. He is a fantasy producer. He's kind of always been. You're going to want to start his best weapons in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride against a very, you know, lackluster Detroit secondary. James Conner might want to be considered to be sat. Detroit has been very good against running backs so far this year. They have allowed the least amount of points per game to the running back position. And for somebody like James Conner, where he was ranked at the running back 20 to 24 range, I'm sure that a lot of people have better options or options that they thought were better. I don't see this being a very good week for James Conner. It looks to be actually pretty rough against a very good rush defense in Detroit. But I'm going to go ahead and start everybody else on that Arizona offense. As far as Detroit, Jared Goff has not been great, but I will say that Arizona has allowed the third most points per game to quarterbacks this season. And granted, that is with a pretty much goose egg from Matthew Stafford, but I think they don't have a great defense, especially their secondary. I think that Amon-Ra will probably feast. I think Jamison Williams will definitely feast, especially taking the second corner and being the speedster that he is, getting the end arounds. I think he's going to be great. I think that this entire offense is going to be great. But I heard you say that you had some concerns about Jameer Gibbs versus David Montgomery. Matt, any particular reason why on the Gibbs?
Just watching him, I haven't seen him, do anything crazy this year. I think he's really good at getting the ball down the field, but I think David Montgomery is kind of like the trusted goal line back. Like he'll get you those downs and he'll get you that touchdown when they get close to the goal line. So I think David Montgomery is probably going to be the more fantasy producer there.
You know what? And I do see what you mean. They are pretty close in terms of fantasy so far this year. I believe I see that Gibbs is number 10, uh, Montgomery is number 13, and that's with Montgomery only running the ball 11 times last week. The one thing I will say is Gibbs, I can understand like the hesitance because people probably expect him to be a 20-yard, or I mean a 20-point per game guy. He is getting those catches. He was targeted 6 times in the first game, 7 times last game, and he's actually out snapping David Montgomery as of last game, 62% to 35%. So, but I think that says a lot about how close they are because Montgomery is doing the most with what he has, and if he somehow gets more opportunities in this offense, then I could see definitely being concerned about Gibbs. But I think they're both pretty good so far this year.
Yeah, I mean Gibbs did get 17 points both weeks, so you're going to start him if you have him. But I guess I'm just a David Montgomery fan. I have him and I'm going to start him. Hopefully he gets those touchdowns. All right, let's go on to the Cowboys versus the Ravens. How about you give your thoughts on that, Vitrano?
Yeah, obviously Lamar is a must start for the Ravens, and it's a very weird game this week because these are not two teams that are or have been great so far this year. We saw Dallas get obliterated last week. Um, we saw Baltimore struggle in week 1 against the Chiefs and then lose to a much worse team in the Raiders in week 2. I do think that you're probably going to start most people overall in this game. You're going to start your Lamar Jacksons, your Derrick Henrys, your Zay Flowers. There are some concerns for me at tight end because I don't know if it's going to be Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely that's going to get a majority of the snaps. Week one, it was Isaiah Likely. Week two, uh, or at least Isaiah Likely got more targets. Week two, it looked like Mark Andrews was the number one. So there are some concerns there. I don't want any part of those tight ends. But as far as like Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson are concerned, I'm all in on those guys.
Yeah, I have to agree. And then the Cowboys, like you're gonna start Dak, you're gonna start CeeDee Lamb. The Ravens, I think, have the best rush defense so far this season, and I don't think the Cowboys have like a tried and true RB yet. So I'm probably not starting any of the Cowboys RBs. But yeah, I'm gonna start Dak. I'm gonna start CeeDee Lamb. I'm not gonna start Brandon Cooks. He has like one good game a year, and we saw that last year. And then Ravens, yeah, you're gonna start Lamar. He's gonna get those points somehow or another. He'll get you those points. And then Zay Flowers is really just the wide receiver one on that team, and he's like really the only wide receiver worth starting. So that's my thoughts on that. And then
Yeah, I think that the big concern here is more so for the offensive lines of both teams. Um, these are two teams that had very good offensive lines in recent memory over the last decade, even, and it doesn't quite look the same. You know, Dak has been sacked 6 times, 3 times in each game so far this year. Lamar has only been sacked 3 times, but that's because Lamar is a maneuver. He's a human joystick. He maneuvers through defenses pretty easily. He can run the ball, um, but that offensive line is horrible. We've seen the way that Derrick Henry has ran behind that offensive line, and it has not looked great. It did not look great week one against Kansas City. It looked a little better last week versus Las Vegas, but this defensive line of Dallas is much better than Las Vegas's is, in my opinion. I don't. I'm gonna start Henry because he is a must start, but this could be a very low scoring game, or it could be a very high scoring game. It's either both defenses are going to be horrible and the offenses are going to be horrible, or vice versa.
yeah, I think that is a good way to look at it. Yeah, I think Derrick Henry you're starting no matter what. So next up is the Chiefs versus the Falcons. So the Falcons, I got to see them play week one, which was really cool. But yeah, Kirk Cousins, I'm not too sure on him yet. Drake London, I drafted him in my leagues this year. I'm not really too sure on him this week. Bijan, I think, is great. I think Bijan is a must start. But yeah, I'm not really too sure on Kirk Cousins and Drake London. And Vitrano can probably give you some input on that in a second. And then for the Chiefs, Mahomes hasn't really been a fantasy producer as of late. But if you drafted Mahomes, he's your quarterback. You're gonna start him. Kelsey, he's kind of going, this way and that way. We're not really sure if he's gonna produce week by week anymore. If you have a Rasheed Rice, he seems to be the wide receiver right now to start. And then Xavier Worthy, he had a really good week one showing, but we don't know if he can produce that consistently. So I think if you're starting anybody on the Chiefs, it's probably Rasheed Rice.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and agree. You definitely have not seen the Patrick Mahomes that a lot of people have expected to see. He's thrown the same amount of touchdowns that he has interceptions this year. He only threw for 151 yards against Cincinnati last year, last week, that don't really have a great passing defense by any means. They've not really been known to have a great passing defense, and you're going up now against an Atlanta team who is, pretty known to have a good passing defense. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I do think, obviously, that you're going to want to start your Mahomes, you're going to want to start your Rasheed Rices and your Travis Kelce's. Um, but there's been a lackluster amount of offense I've expected from the Chiefs compared to what they've actually produced. I do think that the play calling is going to change though. For the Chiefs, because Isaiah Pacheco is now hurt, they're not going to rely on their run game as much as they were willing to do when he was playing. I do think that that should provide more opportunities to Xavier Worthy and Rasheed Rice, as well as Travis Kelsey, who has been absolutely horrible. Please stop focusing on your relationship. Please come back to football. Thank you. Um, I want to see the Chiefs of old, and I'm not just saying that because I have Travis Kelsey in pretty much every league that I'm in, but like I want to see this production. I want to see these guys, do what we've known them to do and win us these fantasy leagues. I just haven't seen that yet from the Chiefs.
Yep.
All right, Vitrano, tell us about the Bills and the Jaguars.
So hold on, 1 second about the Falcons actually, because I believe you mentioned Drake London and I didn't talk about them. Um, the Chiefs have allowed the second most points per game total so far to the quarterback position. Just under Washington. They have been that bad. They have allowed 531 passing yards. That is the fourth most in the entire NFL. And I believe when they played Lamar week one, they even gave up a whole bunch of passing yards to him, 273 to be exact. And he is not a passer. He is not known for getting the ball out. I do think that this is a week where, uh, you know, it should be a very good week for Kirk Cousins to gain more of that confidence, as well as Drake London to have a great game. I'm actually really excited for pretty much everybody on the Atlanta offense. I think that even if they're down, most of these guys will produce, and I think that they should be warranting a start in your leagues.
All right, now tell us about the Bills and the Jags.
Yeah, the Jaguars suck. Trevor Lawrence has looked horrible this year. He looked horrible against Miami. He looked horrible against Cleveland. I imagine he's going to look horrible against Buffalo. Etienne, in kind of the same realm, his fantasy games were saved by touchdowns in both week one and week two. I do think that there's a chance that Buffalo allows a number of points to Travis Etienne because of how much he's used. But I don't imagine that it'll be the same level that A Chain was used to. As far as the receivers, Christian Kirk has been horrible. He was amazing in 2022. When he was playing in 2023, he was pretty good. So far this season, he is bad. He sucks. He has 7 total targets with 2 total catches and a total of 29 yards. Last week, he went for -1 yards on that one catch with 88% snap share. He hasn't looked great. Gabe Davis is boom or bust every week. And Brian Thomas, you don't really know if he's involved in this offense or how much. He does have the most fantasy points of any receiver so far. But, there's a lot to be desired. And then obviously Evan Ingram dealing with a hamstring injury. He's expected not to play, which should leave their backup tight end, Brenton Strange, to get most of the snaps. And he did get targeted quite a bit. So there's just a lot of question marks on this Jacksonville offense. I don't really want any part of them. I don't know what you think, Matt.
Yeah, I like ETN, but that's really about it. The Bills, Josh Allen is a must start, of course. I think James Cook is a must start. The Jaguars have like maybe a mid tier, maybe upper mid tier if you're being generous, rushing defense. But after what James Cook did last week, I think you're starting him no matter what. Um, I like Khalil Shakir. I think he is pretty solid, and I think he's slowly emerging to be one of the top wide receivers on the Bills. So if you have Shakir, you could consider starting him. And then let's go into our last game of the week. That'll be the Bengals versus the Commanders. And Petrana, how about you tell us about that game?
Yeah, this game has my favorite start of the week, and that's going to go ahead and be Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is my favorite player to start this week against a Washington team that has the most expected points allowed to the quarterback position since the start of 2023. They've allowed the most passing yards, the second most passing touchdowns. Burrow is going to feast. I think everybody actually should feast pretty well in this game. If T. Higgins plays, he's gonna feast. Jamar Chase is obviously gonna feast. I think even Mike Gesicki might feast because Washington is that bad. Um, as far as the other side, Jaden Daniels, because of his rushing upside, I think that he warrants a start. I think that Brian Robinson probably warrants a start, but I'm not excited about any of the offensive weapons that Jaden Daniels has because they're not letting him throw the ball at all down the field. That's something that he was known for at LSU. He had the best deep ball in college. He won the Heisman for it. And they're just not letting him throw the ball down the field. So I don't really know what this Washington team is doing.
Yeah, I did see a very funny clip on Reddit. I don't know who the player was. I can't remember. I think it was a Bengals defensive player, and he was saying that he doesn't know why Washington won't let him throw the ball downfield, and he said their offense is like a college level offense right now, which is pretty funny. But yeah, I have to agree with everything Vitrano said. Any more thoughts on that, Vitrano? Or we could do a segment I was actually thinking up on the fly. We could go. So we talked about every game. We could do like a theoretical parlay if we had to pick every winner for the week, and I'll give my winners for each game, and then you can agree or disagree and see what you think.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do that. All for it.
All right. So Browns versus Giants. I got to go with the Browns there. Saints versus Eagles. I'm going with the Saints. Vikings versus Texans. I'm going with the Texans. Buccaneers versus Broncos. I'm going with the Buccaneers. Titans versus Packers. I'm going with the Packers. Colts versus Bears. I'm going with the Colts. Steelers versus Chargers. I'm going with the Steelers. Seahawks versus Dolphins. I'm going with the Seahawks. Raiders versus Panthers. I'm going with the Raiders. Rams versus 49ers. I'm going with the Niners. Cardinals versus Lions. I'm going with the Cardinals. Cowboys versus Ravens. Oh man, this is a hard one, but this one's kind of probably the most coin flip of the week. I'm gonna go with the Ravens. Falcons versus Chiefs. I'm going with the Chiefs. Bills versus Jags. I'm going with the Bills. And Bengals versus Commanders. I'm going with the Bengals.
And I absolutely agree with most of the picks. In a similar fashion, I've got the Browns over the Giants. I have the Saints over the Eagles and the Texans over the Vikings, the Bucks over the Broncos, the Packers over the Titans. I do have the Colts over the Bears. However, I have the Chargers going over the Steelers. I have the Seahawks going over the Dolphins and the Raiders over the Panthers. I have the Niners going over the Rams, the Lions actually going over the Cardinals. I have the Cowboys beating the Ravens. I have the Falcons beating the Chiefs, the Bills beating the Jaguars, and the Bengals beating the Commanders. So I think the biggest probably shock there is going to be the Chiefs going under against the Falcons. I think that it's probably going to be one of those wonky games where the Falcons just kind of figure it out. And I don't really care for how the Chiefs look at the current moment as a 2-0 team.
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest surprise to me is having the Falcons over the Chiefs. I guess we'll have to see on Sunday how it plays out. So I think that's about the end of our very first podcast. If anybody is listening and has any questions or anything like that, or want us to talk about a segment next week, you can email us at thefantasyreserve@protonmail.com. Email us a question and we'll go over it during the next podcast. John, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thank you guys for watching. Anybody that's out there, I appreciate you taking this time to talk about some fantasy football with us, and maybe help you guys win some of your lineups. We look to do this at least once a week and see where it takes us. So thank you guys for listening.